Hello, welcome to Enlightning. I'm here with Saim, who's going to teach us today about Paralus. Saim, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Vaishni. It's been a pleasure talking to you today on this channel. I've been one of the fan of this channel for a very long time, and I educate myself around CNCF open source of tooling by watching some of the wonderful work you put on with some wonderful guests you always have. And thank you very much for doing all these works. So, hi everyone. My name is Saim Safdar. I'm currently a CNCF ambassador and working on open source project as Paralus for a very long time now. And apart from some other activities, I do host podcasts on my YouTube channel called Cloud Native Podcast. And I'm also a Cloud Native Slumber co-founder. We usually host some of the meetup on CNCF open source technologies. And this year, we're looking forward to bringing more expert into this community. So if you wanted to share your expertise, let me know in the chat as well. We're happy
Ah,
to bring you on board.
that's so wonderful. And what I love, Saim, you're around everywhere. I see you in the platform working group. I see like you're definitely like a big member of this community. So I'm really honored to have you here. Super psyched. And one thing, when we were talking together, the two of us before the stream started, Saim, as both a podcaster himself and a fan of the show, gave me the very lovely feedback that the show should be shorter. So we're going to try today to have a shorter show. I'm going to write bigger on the board. We're going to see how it goes. But in that spirit, I do want to keep our up top chat to a minimum. Oh, yay, Justin. I mean, eventually's here. Hello, eventually. So good to see you. So what I do want to talk about a little bit is, I guess, the platform engineering community. We're going to get into a platform engineering in the working group and what it is a little bit, but let's start by talking about the community and KubeCon and Platform Engineering Day. Tell me about what's coming up in the platform engineering community, please.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things we did wonderfully well as a CNCF platform working group, we put together two white paper last year, and I'm one of the contributor to those two paper as well. One of them is actually helping organization and CTO, CEO of the company, that the leader, what the hell platform engineering is, how do you
Mm-hmm.
define it, what are the
Mm-hmm.
essence of platform engineering, what actually drives the momentum forward. So we
Uh-huh.
actually publish a paper in KubeCon Amsterdam that's called Platform Definition White Paper. That's actually defining the vocabulary plus telling readers how the platform engineering came into the existence, and plus our key areas there actually you need to actually improve upon. So this is actually a first white paper we wrote and published
Mm-hmm.
during KubeCon Amsterdam in 2023. Then we think like we wrote a white paper, but it's not just for everyone. We have to continue our effort and make sure that we write another white paper that actually easier to understand for anyone or everyone, regardless of where their background is. So we actually published another white paper during KubeCon Chicago in 2023 around platform engineering maturity model. So this paper is intended for everyone, and basically we try to focus around if you are actually adopting platform engineering today, where
Ah.
you are, what need to be done to improve upon, and how the
Mm-hmm.
journey goes toward. So those are both published today in the
Mm-hmm.
tagappdelivery.io slash
Mm-hmm.
white paper slash platform is the link, and you can explore further as well. Now, what's keeping up in KubeCon Paris? We're working on another white paper around platform as a product. Now we're actually
Ah.
interviewing a lot of the organization and some of the end user from CNCF community, and we're giving them some pre-questions, and we actually wanted to know what's your feedback and key take upon that. So that's where we need a lot of research oriented things. And if you want to join the call, the steps are very simple. Hang out in the platform engineering, the CNCF Slack channel, and the name of
Uh-huh.
the channel is WG/platform. And we bi-weekly we met together on 8 a.m. Pacific time, Tuesday, and we share our perspective. And you can join the call and share what's your company is actually working in the platform engineering domain and what challenges you are solving, and then you contribute further.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I really, really like the CNCF community. It's so cool. So I'm going to start moseying behind the board. Maybe if so, you've given us some good context. So this show is part of a series that I'm doing on Enlightning about different CNCF tooling around authentication and authorization, around access control. So based on the fact that you're a platform engineering, like big in the platform engineering scene, my guess is that Paralus is going to have to do with platform engineering access, like somehow we'll get there. But will you take the time while I'm moving behind the board to either talk about Platform Engineering Day coming up at KubeCon, or I'm also interested in hearing actually from the chat and from you, Saim, about how are you interacting with Kubernetes right now as a developer or as a platform engineer? Like, what's the common way that people are interacting with Kubernetes, if you are? And also, y'all in the chat, if you just want to say hi and where you're from, I do love that this is a global hangout right now. So, all right, I'm gonna move behind the board.
Yes, absolutely. So I think while you're moving behind the board, so we will speak about few things. Right now, there's a first inaugural event happening in Platform Engineering Day. That's in KubeCon Paris. It's basically the co-located event. Prior to the KubeCon keynote, a co-located events that have some concrete agenda in mind, having a particular domain or the topic intended that have some is going to be a broader reach and having some focused area. So this is a platform engineering day happening for the very first time, and that is KubeCon
Mm-hmm.
Paris prior to the main event. So I definitely encourage you to go search even a platform engineering day. You can actually browse, and then you will see the schedule in there. So you see a very good talks in there, some real world practitioner guides, some panel talks in there, and definitely speak about our work that we have done on the platform white paper we put together and the new one we are releasing very soon. So that definitely encourage people to folks to try to see it out. Then there's another activity I'm having heavily involved in. We actually put together a multi-tenancy con in QCon Chicago, the very first inaugural event that is happening again for the second version in this year in KubeCon Paris. This, if you browse on the internet on multi-tenancy con 2024, you will see all of the agenda and the schedule will be live today. So you can hang out, see some of the wonderful talks around there as well. So right now
And
we can first circle back to our main focus here, and that is our how people are accessing Kubernetes cluster from developers and platform and DevOps engineer. So we can start off this thing. Like, I think if folks are actually watching us or hearing us right now, they have different kind of role within the organization. Some are developers, some are operations or DevOps engineer, some are sysadmin, some are different role in their architecture as well. So usually you work with more than one clusters. Might be there are some companies
uh-huh.
have four, five, six cluster uh, in their backyard, and you wanted to get access in a way that you can't pollute other people's work, or you actually not accidentally deleting somebody else's work. So what we have to,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where we began our story, how the developers and the DevOps engineer are interacting with Kubernetes cluster. And with that, I with that, and hand it over to Whitney and Young's question, and then we delve into the very interesting story you will definitely love to hear about more.
I want to say hello to some friends in the chat. We have Thaddeus is joining us right now from Indonesia. Thank you so much for being here. Nick, the first one's here. Hi, good to see you, friend. And we also Nuno came over to say hi. Hi, Nuno.
No.
Uh, cool, cool, cool. So I'm gonna erase this. So I'm so glad folks are here and saying hello. If you haven't said hello yet, please do. So we're talking about platform engineering. We're talking about Kubernetes. We're talking about multi-tenancy. You said where's multi-tenancy con again? Will you repeat that? I missed it.
Yes, so multi-tenancy con actually is another co-located event you usually
I see.
see when you go to the
Okay.
day zero of KubeCon. I think there's a
Uh-huh.
12, 13 co-located events like App Developer Con, Cilium Con, eBPF Day, bunch of very specific technologies that are domain centric and people are
Uh-huh.
using it and investigating it. And we want to get see how the community actually going forward with this trend or this domain. So that's the focus of the co-located event. So multi-tenancy is one of the co-located events similar to the platform engineering day. Last time we did a good job of packing all the people and filling out all the seat of 235 people. And
Wow.
version it's a we did it, and hopefully we have some standing people in the multi-tenancy con as well this year as well in the KubeCon Paris. So I definitely encourage folks will be in the KubeCon. They will definitely attend those events as well because we have some very good user stories from end user who are using the open source technologies from the CNCF lens.
I'm working with Abby Bankser. We're gonna give a talk for Platform Engineering Day, the
Yes.
opening talk actually. So I'm very excited about that. And yeah, we're working very hard. We have some good ideas. I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, how to make myself big. I've only done this a million times. Here we are. We're here. We have some comments. We have a hello. Oops. Oh, Cormage is here. Hello. Hello, hello. Nice to be so glad you're here. And then Cormaju, hi. Hello, hello
Hello.
from India. Okay. Okay, they're coming up. Great. I'm here. I'm ready to learn. So let's talk about before we talk about Paralus, let's talk about the problems that existed in the world that caused Paralus to need to get created.
Yes, absolutely. So let's say we you can draw a developer on the board, and then you
Okay.
draw another role on the board as well, developer or developer and DevOps people.
Okay. So we have a couple of different teams here.
Yes.
Okay.
So
So we
let's
have
say one developer
excellent. Just one
is
developer. Okay.
yes. So let's say me, I am a developer, and Whitney is a DevOps engineer.
Okay.
And then we need to have some clusters somewhere in the board, and then we need to both want to access it.
Okay. And
God.
we're so this is let's you just get some spiky here. And so we have several different clusters.
Yes. Let's say we can
Okay.
actually start with the one cluster and then we expand further as we go.
All right. So let's have a Kubernetes cluster.
Yes. Now
I'm gonna
the
put a
I
little. I'm
now
listening.
I got it. So now the story come like this. I am a developer. I deploy my application. Let's say I install Argo CD on my cluster today, and I want to deploy my application using an Argo CD cluster, or Argo CD
Okay.
install cluster. So that's my
Okay.
first request. So how things happening? So DevOps have some kind of permissions they needed to
Uh-huh.
do. They need it before accessing and installing something in the cluster. So they definitely call DevOps people. Can you give me access to this cluster? A
Uh-huh.
right privileges so I can deploy my stuff on it. So this is a request I requested Whitney via Jira ticket. Can I have access to cluster so I can install my applications via Helm chart or some other technique, and then I deploy my application on top of it. So first
So
you got it. So number one, so step number one, I requested you to give me access to the cluster because the DevOps people in charge of developers, testing, and production environments. Yes, now you tell me, yes, I can give access to cluster. So how you, as a DevOps engineer, I definitely want to hear folks from the chat, how you are giving access to developer in your team right now, what you are doing. So I think the part of the strategy here is we need some kind of access permission model in Kubernetes. So both team member can access clusters with different roles in their having some different roles. So in Kubernetes, there is no user concepts. Like you can't create kubectl get create Saim as a user. You can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to do, we need to have some RBAC, role-based access control. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, as a DevOps engineer, you create a namespace that's called, let's say, called the dev namespace, and then you create a role, and then you create a
Mm-hmm.
role binding, and then you associate this role to me or a developer
Mm-hmm.
to access the cluster. So when I requested you, that is a step one. Then you give me
Mm-hmm.
access. Now, as a DevOps engineer, when you need
Mm-hmm.
to do it, that's where the challenge number one first comes up. If you want to give me access to the cluster, can you give access to every resource in the cluster? Yes, you
Mm-hmm.
can do it, but I'm not a good one. I can delete other work easily, and then you don't call me out. So basically, you need a mechanism so I can access only resources that I needed. So in a Kubernetes, you have pod, deployments, replica set, ingress controller, CRD. And then you have a namespace as well. So you can create a namespace in a cluster, and then you actually define a role in that namespace that says that Saim can only access dev namespace and install, let's say, Argo CD on that namespace. So that's where I think we set another table in here and draw how the RBAC works. Just a few words on the RBAC. Yes,
Okay.
good.
So what I've got here is the old way, which is you, Saeem, you're a developer, and you ask for cluster access, and then I'm DevOps, and I say yes, but to do that, I have to use RBAC. I create a role for you. I limit what that role can access, and then you can do stuff. And that's the pre-Paralus model, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a pre-parallel model. So basically, that's where if you don't have any open source tool today,
Mm-hmm.
that's how
Mm-hmm.
you are actually dealing with Kubernetes. Because Kubernetes by default doesn't give you any user information. So you have two roadmaps to follow. One,
Uh-huh.
you give everything in the cluster, you give me access to the entire cluster. And if you
Mm-hmm.
then its life is absolutely, then you need to wake up 2 a.m. in the morning and call me and tell me, oh, Saim, why you actually deleted Whitney's cluster?
So, problems with this method.
Yes, so I can tell you, I think we can call it how we can actually, what we do name it. We name it in an easier way so folks can. Number one, we can call it a problem number one is
Uh-huh.
RBAC centralization.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So the
RBAC
challenge,
centralization. Well, let's just say like it's hard to scope RBAC correctly. Can
yes.
we say that? Is that the same thing?
Or yes, I think that's work as well. Or we can RBAC
Okay.
at, yes. Yes, that's a good one.
Okay.
Or we can change later with a new,
Okay.
or folks can ask in the chat as well. What do we name it?
Okay. So it's easy to give too much or too little access.
Yes. And
Yeah.
then I think that problem number two is
Mhm.
auditability. Like I'm
Mhm.
actually, you running a command on your cluster, kubectl get ns. You see the
Mhm.
namespace. Then you hit a command kubectl get ns dev namespace. Then you actually see the cluster that in namespace, what are the things reside in that namespace. Then you
Mhm.
add kubectl get pod. So you are actually
Mhm.
executing command, but let's say in fourth or fifth command, you
Mhm.
delete. So it's very difficult for you as a DevOps, if I'm developer,
Mhm.
accessing the cluster, executing command, you can't do, it's tough for troubleshooting if you don't have
Mhm.
auditability in place. So that's we call auditability. And got it. So we have two things: or hard to scope RBAC, auditability. Then I want to have a cluster as a single sign-on, like how you do in
Mhm.
application. Like if you have a cluster
Mhm.
and you want to access the cluster via GitLab or GitHub or via
Mhm.
Azure, via Microsoft, via Google or some other identification provider,
Mhm.
IDP, you can't do it. So that we call a need for SSO, single sign-on, or
Mhm.
single sign-on plus authorization, authentication. Yes, or
It's hard to,
integration.
and yeah. Is that okay? Or do you
Yes,
want to
it
catch?
works
Okay.
well. Yes, it's
Okay.
easier to understand. Absolutely.
That's how I roll. um,
Yes,
okay.
got it.
So, yeah. So, for example, GitHub, GitLab, that sort of thing, right?
Yes, absolutely. Audit logging, auth authorization, hard to scale, and there are a bunch of few others. Like we can go more deeper in here, but that's where
Uh-huh.
we see many of the people are seeing the challenging. Like these
Yeah.
are the three white ones. Then we can say like is a permission. How do you get permission when the person leave of
Uh-huh.
the
Mm-hmm. Oh.
called
Well,
permission
yeah.
revocation or other kind of stories?
Uh-huh. Uh, it also just seems like a tedious manual process.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. So you we call it
tedious manual process. What happens
yes,
when DevOps engineer leaves
yeah, yes,
company?
yes, absolutely. And also there's a configuration and a scripting issue as well. If you want to remove the revocation of the fly, you write a bunch of scripting or configuration languages.
Mm. And that's related to people leaving the company. Scripting
Yeah.
is usually used for this.
Yes, absolutely. So let's say you have 10 people leave the company. What you should do is you write a script
Mm-hmm.
and then you tell the cluster this is how you remove them, the people. Or even you have some kind of batch jobs
Uh-huh.
you execute every week, every day to see if somebody has access to the cluster or wrong permission to the cluster. So that's where things become very tedious. If you're
Yeah.
doing it this way, then there are plethora of things. I think the board will be easily filled with those.
With all the problems.
Yes, but we
Okay.
keep it a generic one. Like I think these are the most people actually using. But we love to see if people have some other opinion on the chat they can share.
Did you want to mention a problem with multi-tenancy?
Yes, I think we can because we introducing the concept of namespaces.
Uh-huh.
That's where the multi-tenancy comes in. So
Okay.
multi-tenancy in simpler term is basically in a cluster, you carve
Uh-huh.
out a compute storage, network, volume, all of the resources you have in the cluster in two chunks. So
Uh-huh.
Whitney and Saim are two tenant in the cluster. So Whitney has access to, let's say, DevOps namespace, and
Uh-huh.
Saim has access to dev namespace. So Whitney is
Mm-hmm.
not actually developing an application. So you are not a good example in here. Let's bring in
Mm-hmm.
another one from the community. Let's say
Okay.
Nuno. Let's say Nuno
Uh-huh.
is another developer. So Saim and
Uh-huh.
both are the developer. So I'm developing the application on the kind cluster, and Nuno wants to
Uh-huh.
try some WASM WSL things on the cluster. So
Uh-huh.
how do I give access to cluster to Nuno? I give a namespace to
Okay.
Nuno so he can actually do his work. That is actually a role of multi-tenancy. So now in a multi-tenancy, same challenges that you wrote already. Hard to
Okay.
scope back,
Uh-huh.
auditability, identity provider, single line sign on, TDS
Uh-huh.
manual process. So all these things can relate to another namespace that
Uh-huh.
anybody can accessing. Because if no accessing his namespace, he don't want me to give right access to his namespace.
Mm-hmm.
So I can delete his work easily. And we're
Yeah.
living off. We're living very far away from each other. We can't fight.
You can do whatever you want. He can't reach you. Um,
Yes.
Excellent. So this is before Paralus. This is the world that what the world was like. And so Paralus was created. So what is Paralus?
Yes, absolutely. I think in an easier and simplistic term, you can say, and I think it's very like in a one word, how to set up an RBAC without touching a YAML is a Paralus.
Okay.
How does Paralus help you create RBAC without writing YAML files?
Paralus is a technology.
Yes, or in a generic terminology, you can say is Parallels is a tool that help you centralizing RBAC.
I liked your that helps you set up RBAC in a
Yes,
streamlined way. That manage RBAC.
yes, you can say Parallels is simplify cluster management,
Uh-huh.
enhances security.
Simplifying cluster management is too general.
Yes, yes, too general, absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh, I think you can say like simplifying centralized RBACs, and that's another generic term as well.
Does it, can you just say it is related to RBAC? So it helps you manage RBAC by centralizing
Simplifying
it.
RBAC, yes, or we can say simplifying RBAC, enhancing security, and streamline RBAC operations.
Okay.
Simplify,
How about simplify and streamline RBAC?
yes, or RBAC operations, we can call it.
RBAC off, which in turn enhances security.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, and now we actually, in order to understand in a perfect manner, we
We,
need to draw some sort of architecture on the in here, or that become a bigger one. But let's say, and I can share the link with the people as well, so actually they can basically go
Before
into.
you do that, a couple of things. One is if you put the link in the private chat, I can put it in here as an admin, which will send it to all the different places.
Yeah,
Two is hello to Alejandro. Welcome. Three is we have a question for you.
got it.
Can Paralus be used to manage RBAC for multi-cluster across cloud and on-prem?
I think like you can think about this question in a two different way. But one thing is that Parallels can run anywhere if the cluster is on a Kubernetes or simply conformant Kubernetes based distribution, either be on an EKS, AKS, or GKE. So it's work. You can install it via Helm, so it's work. Now, if you run it on the multiple cloud or multiple region, how you do it actually? Number one thing is we already set up these things in front of you. So Parallels is actually basically when you install it, it's install an agent in your cluster. So basically your hit and call is create a service account token. So basically, if you want to access for the multi-cloud setup, I'm assuming
Mm-hmm.
you will create some sort of high availability layer on top of those two on-prem that is actually accessing or going in the two different cloud region, HA availability or some other node that accessing the cluster. That's where you can actually bring in Parallels API and then write it down as well. But as we actually draw some dashboard, this question will be answered as we go. So I think
Okay.
now what we can do is we have one story already in the board. Now the another
Mm-hmm.
story is make it a diagram more shorter and more oriented. What you do is now we have a dev. You can draw another dev and DevOps people, and then you
Uh-huh.
create another layer that is for the
Uh-huh.
Parallels, and then you let create a Kubernetes cluster,
Okay.
and then we actually miss out some pieces. So that is after Parallels story.
Okay. Then I'll make it a little lower so I have room to write after Paralus. So we have Saim, our dev,
Yes.
and then we have Whitney, our DevOps. Then we have Paralus.
Yes. And then you also draw
Uh-huh.
three different cluster this time on EKS,
Okay.
GKE, or AKS. Let's say we do it in a cloud way.
Okay. So this
Either
is
my yes,
EKS Kubernetes cluster. GKE. I'm not sure the Azure one. GK. We'll say on-prem,
yes,
right? Can we?
yes, absolutely.
Instead of me.
Or
Okay.
local cluster, anyone can work. Local on-prem can work.
Okay.
And now we have three cluster in players. Now
Okay.
remember what you did is what you are doing is you are actually creating DevOps people creating an RBAC. So
Yeah.
this is a very generic diagram so people can actually understand how the parallels work. But there's a five, six components inside the parallels that easing your job as well. So that's where the information lives in the documentation. You can actually go into the parallels.io and watch it. But we make it simpler and then we actually expand it further internally. Now what's happening is, let's say if I want to access an EKS cluster, and
Uh-huh.
I want to have a namespace called dev.
Mm-hmm.
That's developers granted me access to dev
Mm-hmm.
namespace. You create a namespace in EKS cluster and you call it a dev. Got it.
Okay.
Now what happening is now as a DevOps engineer, you go into the Parallels dashboard. You can put
Mm-hmm.
an arrow from Parallels app
Mm-hmm.
from dev of Whitney to the Parallels arrow goes and then Parallels to the AKS cluster.
Okay. So have at this point, have you requested access for a dev namespace, or that's just something I'm making for future developers?
So basically, what's happening is we have a dashboard called
Uh-huh.
Paralus dashboard. So this is a
Mm-hmm.
console.paralus.io. You can
Mm-hmm.
actually add a domain in here. So then develop
Mm-hmm.
what DevOps people as a Whitney you, what you do
Mm-hmm.
is you log in into the dashboard.
Okay, so first you need to you ask me for access to the dev namespace,
Now you're a
right?
DevOps engineer. Yes. You have a DevOps
Yeah.
engineer and you go to the console Paralus. Let's say you go to the console Paralus.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Now, how you can actually actually entered into the dashboard. Remember, we talk
Mm-hmm.
about sign on. If you have a GitLab or GitHub ID, you can actually use same authentication you already have, and then you can access the dashboard. Step number two. So that's where you
Mm.
have a single sign on to accessing the Parallels dashboard. That's step number two.
Okay.
Now the step number three is now you want an EKS cluster so that Saim can actually access it. So what you do
Mm-hmm.
is you go into the dashboard, you create a role in the dashboard and says that Saim has this role. Like Saim becomes, let's say, Saim become. You create a group, and that group name is called Dev, and then you add me into this Dev group. You create a group that's name is Dev, and then DevOps create a Dev group, and add Saim into this group.
Okay.
So in that, what this group does, this group can access a dev namespace in an EKS cluster. So
Cool.
that's yes. So this DevOps creator group, that the group's
Mm-hmm.
goal is to create, is to access the dev dev group. And what dev group does is essentially it can access the dev namespace in an EKS cluster. So that's
The
step.
perilous. The perilous dev group is made up of people who can access the dev namespace.
Yes.
Oops. Sorry. Okay.
Got it. So these are the typically four steps you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And further, but I think that's a easier way to understand as this moment to make it a
Mm-hmm.
simple. So these are the four steps you did to give access to developers. Now, what end up happening is now the day two operations become. This is what you
Mm-hmm.
set in the in the parallels. Now, the day two operation is like me as a SIME want to access the EKS dev NS namespace. Then basically what I need to do, I will need to
Mm-hmm.
access the dashboard as the DevOps people accesses it. Now, if I go into the console, then I have a one uh, group. I am part of
Mm-hmm.
it, and that group has EKS cluster and EKS dev namespace. So then day two operation become this: developers day two that sign actually
Mm-hmm.
access the Parallels dashboard with the rule with a group name dev,
Mm-hmm.
and he can access the cluster. First, he log in into the cluster. Yes, first he log in into the Parallels dashboard via single
Mm-hmm.
sign. Might be GitLab, GitHub, or different identity provider. You can bring in your own identity provider.
Okay. That's step one.
Yes, now you actually logging into the dashboard. Now the
Mm-hmm.
step two is you are now a part of group that DevOps created.
Mm-hmm.
You are already a part of it, this group. Now in this group, there is only EKS, DevOps, Dev NS namespace. Might be there are 10 other namespaces, but the
Mm-hmm.
DevOps folks only give you access to Dev namespace, When you
Mhm.
write a command or kubectl get ns, you will only see a namespace that you have view privileges to see it or read
Mhm.
write privileges to do it. All the other namespaces you can't do. Let's say if you can create kubectl, delete somebody else's namespace, then there's an error happening. You can't access this namespace.
Mhm.
That is day two operation for the developers. Let's say Nuno came in, another developer in
Mhm.
our team. We are now
Mhm.
extending our team in
Mhm.
a organization. Now Nuno came up. What I needed to do as a DevOps, Whitney will do is Whitney will create another name inside the same group,
Mhm.
assign a dev grip to Nuno as well.
Mhm.
So when the Nuno joins the team, the same stuff is happening. He accessed
Mhm.
the Paralus dashboard via SSO, and now when he go into the dashboard in the Paralus,
Mhm.
he can only see he only has the right privileges for dev NS namespace. Others he can only view but can't write
Mhm.
anything. And that's where another challenge. Remember, in a previous setting, in a
Mhm.
previous RBAC model, if there's a no role exist, you have to write it up.
Uh-huh.
Let's say you have a CRD and you want this CRD to only two people can view this CRD. You write a
Mhm.
YAML file, you create a role and role binding. This is where you can create a role inside Parallels dashboard with just a click of a button.
So Paralus has predefined roles that
Yes,
that many orgs are going to want to use these types of roles. So
yes,
you don't have to build it yourself. It already exists.
yes. And also in a day two operation, let's say you go into the Parallels dashboard, you have different teams accessing the same cluster.
Mhm.
EKS cluster is a multi-tenant cluster. Like me and you are part of one team that developing, let's say, YouTube application, and another team is developing application that's say run on the Rancher desktop. So we're both working simultaneously in one cluster. What end up happening is when you go into the Parallels dashboard, you
Mhm.
can customize a view, like develop an let's say EKS cluster for YouTube team have their own views, and
Mhm.
we have our own views. So we're
Mhm.
not working on each other toes with our work. So that is another a developer experience for
Mhm.
and ops people to manage roles centrally and actually create a workspace. You can create workspaces inside Parallels
Mhm.
for different teams. So basically, if I go into the dashboard, I can see my own workspace with my own cluster, and those cluster has only the right DevOps people provided me.
So do DevOps create a workspace or a customized dashboard for devs, or do devs customize their own dashboard?
Is basically like if the cluster administrators are DevOps people,
Uh-huh.
they essentially create a namespace. Plus, what developers can see, let's say one developer can writing two applications for EKS and GKE. So they can
Uh-huh.
basically create their own workspaces for different clusters.
Okay. So devs can create their own workspaces and
Yeah.
customize their dashboard.
Yes, absolutely. So these become a day two operation. A list can expand here a little. You can actually customize own role based on your
Mm-hmm.
organizational setting. You can create
Mm-hmm.
customs dash like custom workspaces based on organization policies as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can actually define high criteria of how they, and then then you have a centralized repository where you can actually access grant and permission provoked when the company's employees leave or join the company. So in this setting, another feature that's really shine. Let's say Nuno will leave off some company or might be in a break for next 2 months. So in a
Mhm.
previous set, what you need to do, you might be putting on some Excel sheet who are the all the
Uh-huh.
people have access to these resources. And then you create a
Uh-huh.
bad job, and then you see this person leave of the company. You created a bad job, and then the script delete the user from this cluster. In a Parallels,
Mhm.
remember, we created an dashboard
Mhm.
and we created a group, and the group has two users right now, Saim and
Mhm.
Nuno. What you essentially does is you remove Nuno from this dev group. All the access that this group has will be removed
Mhm.
from with just a one click
Mhm.
experience for you to actually remove or revoke permissions.
Okay, this is a good time. It is a one-click experience
For
to remove
revoke,
permissions.
yes,
Yeah. So this is a good time, I think, to step back and think about. So we have. So there. It sounds like. So it sounds like there's still a little bit of manual work in terms of setting up roles in the first place,
yes,
uh, but but there is some help with that because there are some predefined roles instead of you having to super duper create it from
yes,
as a DevOps engineer from that. But in terms of, but now we have everything, all of the access to the cluster is now going through Paralus. So Paralus is now like a like you said, centralized place to manage RBAC. So now you haven't said this yet, but I'm imagining there's some audibility involved, so we can see like
yes,
every time your I as the DevOps engineer can see every time you as the developer are accessing your namespace, perhaps. Um, you have as the dev as a person accessing the interface, you well both of us really have an easy single sign-on experience to get to our Paralus dashboard in the first place. And then as a DevOps engineer, I can create a group of devs. I can add and remove people from that group. I can customize what exactly you have access to. Uh, cool. So I'm putting together how this is
yes,
this solving all of the problems that we were talking about before. Awesome.
yes, absolutely. So basically, I think one way you look at it, like from particularly for the day two setting, day two
Mm-hmm.
operation. So I
Mm-hmm.
think to set up an RBAC manually,
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
set up an RBAC without having automation in place. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening is you need to take care of two things. You need to
Mm-hmm.
add another person in the team. You need to add
Mm-hmm.
another member. What you need to do without having an automation in place is you create another
Mm-hmm.
role and role binding for another person, or you can actually associate the same role binding to
Mm-hmm.
another developer so he can access the cluster. That is actually removed from Parallels. You don't need to
Mm-hmm.
write YAML file for role binding or all different kinds of read. That's become obsolete. You only create inside a Parallels, and then the
Mm-hmm.
Parallels dashboard actually granting access behind the scene as well. That's one of the major challenges. Then we also have auditability in place.
Oh.
In Parallels, we have a terminal inside a Parallels dashboard. Then you can actually write commands, like you can write command inside the Parallels dashboard for troubleshooting purposes. And also, we do auditability. Let's say if you executed 7 commands, we DevOps as a cluster administrator Whitney can see now the cluster is in a brokerage stage, is in a break.
Mhm.
Cluster is now broken up. Somebody else is not actually have right privilege to access it, and some things
Mhm.
actually have not been in there since day zero. What's happening? You can go into the Parallels dashboard and do
Mhm.
all the forensic or the research history. Every command in kubectl will be logged in the Parallels. So that's where
Mhm.
you the granularity, like I can know who can access and who cannot. Another, I think the easiest step is that for the Parallels point of view, you have a single sign on in a Kubernetes
Mhm.
cluster. So before I can give you access to the cluster, you need to be authenticated and authorized. That's
Mhm.
challenge for a lot of enterprises, even till today. Like if you tell me I'm onboarding, you onboarding me as a developer in your team. So onboarding take times because you
Mhm.
give access to the cluster. You need to do all these kind of stuff. But I can't access the cluster and you can't give me the full access to the cluster in a production setting. There should be
Uh-huh.
authentication and authentication. So what
Uh-huh.
Parallel is, it's make your life more comfortable because authentication authorization is in place via single sign-on. So it's not me accessing the cluster from blindly. There's some layers in between me and my cluster. So that's
Yeah.
layer protecting me for misuse or like some bad malicious actor when I survive
Uh-huh.
up. That the single sign-on is, I think, that's where community love this feature very well. I think we heard a lot of good feedback from single sign-on. So if you are in GitHub or GitLab, you can access these cluster regardless of where your permission on. That's one. And then I think, as we mentioned, we have workspaces for different clusters. So basically, it's not kind of a multi-tenancy in journal, but it's an operational practice. Like you having two different clusters and you go into the dashboard and the dashboard is telling you you are part of two cluster and in these
Uh-huh.
two cluster, you have different privileges. So it's still a developer experience dashboard that comes handy when you're working on multiple clusters. And if you do it manually in a kubectl way and you have five different cluster, it's just a command who can tell you what you have. What you do is kubectl can I uh, you execute a command and that says can I delete namespace in this cluster. That's tell you. But in a parallels you already has predefined role that can tell you this persona.
Mhm.
So I think what up to we talk about is essentially three main things: authentication, access control, and auditability. So
Paralus
may,
benefits. Well, main points. I'm gonna say main points because these are all
yes.
benefits. Okay. So the first one is aids. What did you say? Access? I'm gonna have to communicate.
Authentication, authentication,
Authentication.
and
And that's by integrating with different providers, like single
yes,
sign-on providers.
yes, and then we yeah,
With many SSO providers.
yes.
Okay.
Then the next one is access control.
And okay. So that would be like by consolidating all of the access points in the Paralus
Yeah,
dashboard.
absolutely. You can say it like you accessing the cluster from a
Uh-huh.
main central point of view. Like you can't accessing the cluster blindly. There's a layer of
Uh-huh.
abstraction is in place. Uh, w-
Um, People can
you can
access
say
one or many clusters, right?
yes, or if we can say it, enforce access policies based on the user identity and role. Enforce,
Um, I'm
in,
I'm thinking about what you said, and sometimes if we say in my because I'm a relatively new learner, if we say everything in the jargony speak, it starts to lose meaning to me. So I'm just
yes,
trying to think about how to say what you just said in a simple way. So
yes.
I think it's important to mention that through the Paralus dashboard, you have access to one or many clusters, and then you want to say it, what say your part of it again.
Or you like, I think there's you can add like you can enforce
Uh-huh.
policy because we're telling we're adding access control. So that's mean we have some
Mm-hmm.
enforce policies based on
Mm-hmm.
step number one.
Can create and enforce access policy.
Yes, cluster admins can enforce policies based on identity and role.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then hopefully the third point's not too long.
Third is actually auditability.
Okay. Okay. And
Or logs all interactions, kind of easier word to explain.
mm,
Logs all interaction and track kubectl history.
uh,
All
and then
kubectl.
I think it's important to say too, like this assists in troubleshooting and
Yes,
debugging. Yeah.
absolutely. This could definitely help because we have already an extended terminal in place, a terminal inside the dashboard. So
Mm.
a terminal where you can actually hit command. So integrated terminal you can add or providing troubleshooting or experience. Yes, that's great. Oh my God, we feel it. We feel it. We spoke
we're
less, but it's still
we're we're looking good. So I want to kind of just organize these. So here's some main points. Excellent. We have our drawing. I want to give like another dev namespace just to drive home the point that you might have access to more than one of these clusters. Um, and then we have day two operations. Cool. Great. So if you feel, is there anything else you would like to say before I do a recap? And if anyone has questions, I've seen a couple questions go through about VMware Tanzu and what its history is what it's gonna be like after Broadcom. I can't say there VMware well, Tanzu is not going anywhere. It's still going to be a thing. It's not going away. But the details of it, I'm not really authorized to talk about. So I'm not going to say, that's why I haven't highlighted those comments or said anything about it. But it's not going away. I'll say that much. And then, so if chat has any other questions, we'd love to hear it. And Saim, is there anything else that you want to add before I do a recap of everything you've taught me today?
Yes, absolutely. I think what we can do is like from here, I think if
Mm-hmm.
people s- still up to this place, still up into our journey and tracking us, I think they'll see the three critical aspect because as a developers, me, you, and anybody, they have two
Uh-huh.
main in mind. Remember, in a Kubernetes cluster, there's all not always been a one user. There are tens and hundreds of developers working in a
Uh-huh.
single cluster. So you need
Uh-huh.
to have a scope, RBAC
Mm-hmm.
scale. Manually, it's not even a solution, not even a consideration. That's off of the.
Mm-hmm.
Number two,
Yes.
you need audit trail of what I did and what you did. Number
Uh-huh.
three, you need some sort of troubleshooting mechanism, and then you need developer experience when you actually define roles. These are the main big, I think, key takeaways for everyone. Then how we providing this thing is a can be a debatable, like how Parallels will be installed, how you access it, how are the different roles be integrated in Parallels. That's I can tell people you can actually watch some of the my previous talk on the platform gone and cloud native security gone, and we have bunch of wonderful article written on the parallels.io. We also have one more thing in mind because we knew parallel is not one of the solution that people working it alone. Like people have something else is in place because if you are working with a service mesh today, then the service mesh also requires RBAC. Like I can
Uh-huh.
access from this point of view, then the service mesh owner will do this point of view. So these RBAC is for all of these open source tools. So we wanted them to Parallels become integration point, not just a standalone tool that you can use it. That's where we actually added Parallels APIs. So you basically have dashboard, Parallels
Uh-huh.
API, and then you can actually install Parallels via Terraform provider. There's a one company, I forget the name of iHerb. They actually created a Terraform module to install Parallels. So you can access via
Mm-hmm.
dashboard, via
Mm-hmm.
API, via Terraform provider. Then I call about we actually working on how do we actually extend some of the RBAC thing for Argo CD community. That's where the article is written, and we saw some side of unification that can be done in future. That is one I needed to highlight this. Then there are a bunch of different roles we wanted to know from the community. They wanted to add in the parallels because it's typical how the policies work in the Kubernetes. You have a libraries of the policies, then you pick and choose. Then we want like there's some sort of roles become that's kind of a nature. Organization can stand, but basically you have some sort of roles added in there as well. So basically, I think in kind of recapping, and then you actually do a recap as well. So basically, we wanted right now the Paralysis is on AWS Marketplace. You can
Okay.
actually install the marketplace. Number two, we also in the Digital Ocean Marketplace, and then we have also in the Civo Cloud Marketplace as well. So these
Mm-hmm.
three areas you can actually install. Then you can actually install via Terraform module, API,
Mm-hmm.
or dashboard. And you can install how you can install Parallels kind K3 as any cluster. Is if it is a Kubernetes compliant, it will be installed. No need to worry about it. Now, Whitney, it's your turn for a recap.
I have one question before I have a recap. Is Paralus intended solely for human users, or is there a case where a robot, a machine, a process would access Paralus or use?
I think I think currently, to be honest with you, we don't see, based on my community interaction, anyone
Mm-hmm.
using like that. But how the architecture works, I don't believe there's an issue. Either it's a human or a robot or somebody else. Because the
Uh-huh.
architecture is like this, you access the cluster via Paralus core.
Uh-huh.
Every interaction you did first interact with the Paralus. Then when you
Uh-huh.
go into the cluster, there is a Paralus agent install on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's give the service account token. That service
Mm-hmm.
account token gives you permission to view, delete, modify resources. So let's say if there is a
Mm-hmm.
machine, then machine interact via Parallels, and then there is
Mm-hmm.
an agent install on these clusters
Mm-hmm.
in different spaces that can call and then do the heavy lifting. I don't seem to see in any use case anybody using it, but I hope it's not going to be an issue because the architecture asks you that everything you did must be via some centralized point of view. Otherwise, there is so much jargons.
It's true. All right. Okay, I feel ready to do a recap. So first we talked about the problems that existed before Paralus that caused to be created. So we have our developer, which is you, Saim, and we have me, which is DevOps. And so before Paralus, a developer, when they want to access a cluster, they'd have to ask the DevOps person, this is good for my face, ask the DevOps person, hey, can I have access? Like that's a manual process. And then as a DevOps person, if it's me, I have to use RBAC, I have to create a role, I have to create a role binding, I have to figure out like what can Saim even have access to and define it. And then I say, yes, I've made access for you. And then you can access the cluster. This has a lot of problems. For one thing, it doesn't scale. There may be hundreds of developers. I wonder why it doesn't scale on this list. We didn't do it. Doesn't scale. There could be hundreds of developers that need access. So to have to go through this manual, tedious process every time isn't reasonable. We also have, it's hard to scope RBAC. So it's you could give too much or too little access, and then it's very much a pain in the, because it's a tedious process, very hard to fix. It's hard to audit, like weeks from now. Can you remember who you gave access to what? Do you know who's using the access that you gave them, or do they have access to things that are unnecessary for them? It's hard to integrate with different SSO providers. So this during this old manual way, you have to log in with kubectl, or there's no way to provide that like beautiful SSO experience that you can have within a corporation. So we talked about it being a tedious and manual process. And then we have the problem of like, what happens when someone leaves the company? Like it can be difficult to revoke the access that they once had. It can be difficult if the person who's leaving is the one who's defining the roles. That's also hard. So scripting is, before Paralus, scripting was how they answered that problem. And then the other thing is there's no troubleshooting mechanism, which is related to it being hard to audit. And then, as we just said, it doesn't scale. So then Paralus is a tool that helps you simplify and streamline these RBAC operations, and therefore it enhances your security. So we drew a new situation here. So we have our, after Paralus, there's our DevOps person, and we have two developers, Saim and Nuno. And then we have Paralus. So this is a layer between the humans and then the one or many different Kubernetes clusters that they may need access to. And these clusters that we made are different. We have one in AWS, one in Google, we have one on-prem. So this Paralus interaction, this layer, it could be a dashboard. We mostly talked about it as though it's a dashboard, but it could also be an API, so you could wrap it in your own whatever, and it could also be a Terraform module. So first, to set up Paralus access. So we have the DevOps person needs access to Kubernetes stuff. And so that's when, the developer does. So the DevOps person accesses their version of the Paralus dashboard with their single sign-on, and they create a dev group. And then they add Saim, they would add Nuno to this dev group, assuming those two should have access to the same things. And then, so this dev group then is made up of people who the DevOps person has declared should have access to the things that I define. So that's all done through the Paralus dashboard. And then now the devs, when they want to access Kubernetes, they do that through the Paralus dashboard, and they have a seamless single sign-on experience. They can only see the things that the DevOps engineer has said that they are allowed to see. So there's a layer between the devs and the cluster. So the DevOps experience, at first, I got to be honest, when you were first talking about this and setting it up, I was like, I don't know, that doesn't seem so much better than the way you have to manually set it up before. But then you told me that that Paralus will also offer like predefined roles. So if there are like normal things that in an organization are going to happen as a dev, I can go ahead and just use these abstractions that already exist instead of having to build my own from scratch. And then also the devs, the org is going to give them certain permissions, but then the devs can customize what they want their Paralus dashboard and their workspace to look like within those permissions. So if there's something they access more than other things, they can make that more prominent. So when a developer accesses that dashboard, they can see everything they're logged into. They can also see, like, it's really good for if you're dealing with lots of different clusters and lots of different clouds. They can see all of that, what they have access to all over the place, all in one spot. Then also, if a dev leaves, then it's just a one-click experience to completely remove their access to everything. It's not like hunting down, like, wait, what did I give them access to? I don't remember. I have to go figure it out. It also, this one layer between the people and the infrastructure, it's logging everything that's happening. So therefore, that you can troubleshoot. You can see, like, if something goes wrong, you can see who's been there, what have they done recently. And that's pretty cool to be able to do that across different clusters, across different clouds. And so, yeah, troubleshooting and access history from the Paralus dashboard. So the three main takeaways that we went over at the end, the three big things it adds is authentication. So giving everyone, the DevOps engineer and the developers, everyone single sign-on access using different providers. And then once you're in there, there's access control. So people can access one or many clusters. And then the cluster admin can enforce policies that are based on the identity, the specific user identity, but also the role that they've been assigned. And then finally, the auditability. So all those interactions are logged, kubectl history is logged. It helps you with troubleshooting, and you have access to a terminal from within the Paralus dashboard. And that's the recap. What do you think? Is there anything we need to add?
You will be hired in the Paralus community now.
Well, that's why I do it. Not really,
Yes,
not really.
absolutely.
This is great. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I just love learning, and this is a super cool tool, and I absolutely see the value of it.
Great. I totally love it as well, because now we have another communicator for this tool in the community as well.
Absolutely cool. And I'll be at Platform Engineering Day, so I'll see you there. And so, as someone who's watched the show, perhaps you know this. We're going to replay the music, and we're going to dance our goodbyes. Sound good?
Yes.
Uh-oh, did you freeze, Saim?
Yes,
oh, no, you're moving. Okay, you're moving. Cool. So, yes, here we go. Gonna say goodbye. There it is. Bye. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for those who watched the recording. If you have any questions, there's a Paralus Slack, right? It's its own Slack. Yeah. All right.